Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's Customer Sure webinar. I'm Guy Letts, and in the background is my colleague Darren Wake. He's on hand to gather up any questions to keep us in order, well, keep me in order, keep monitoring the time. We want these sessions to be fairly short and pithy because we know you're all busy, but I'm going to allow just a couple of minutes people to get their connections settled, get their sound sorted. There's all these different tools. We all these online meetings, don't we, in the tools. So just a couple of seconds while people get joined and settled. And meanwhile, a bit of housekeeping. There'll be a chance for questions at the end if we have time. I've got quite a bit to rattle through, and I'm going to go quite quickly. But if there is time for questions at the end, we'll take those. Feel free to leave if the questions aren't relevant to you. I'm sorry if you find I do go a bit quickly, but we will record the session and we'll send a link after the video afterwards, so you don't need to scribble everything down. And if we don't have time for your questions, or if you want a one-to-one follow-up, then we're very happy to organise those individually. And of course, not surprisingly, you'll get a chance to give feedback afterwards, because we want to make sure that these sessions are as useful for you as we possibly can. Quick introduction to who I am. I'm Guy Letts. I lead on most of our implementations, and actually over the last 12 years, we've helped clients start collecting customer feedback and measuring Net Promoter and customer satisfaction, and improving their customer satisfaction now in hundreds of companies all around the world. And over that time, we've, of course, learned a huge amount. And what we want to do in these sessions is simply to share that. Today's not primarily a sales call or a pitch. Oh, I'm not going to lie, obviously, we'd love to have the privilege of working with you. But if we can help whoever you end up using, working with, or whoever's software you end up using, if we can help, then we're happy to share our information. And if you find you want to work with us, then that's a bonus. But today, we're just happy to share what we know. I'm going to try and keep it to 30 minutes, so I'll get started. These are the areas I'm going to cover. What we're going to make sure is that we identify 5 common pitfalls amongst people who run customer feedback programs. There's a summary of them there. I don't know if you're like me, but very often I find satisfaction surveys can be quite frustrating as a customer, being asked to fill them in. Often they're long, they're sent at the wrong time. The questions don't always resonate with what's important to me. And so in some quarters, satisfaction surveys have developed a bit of a bad reputation. And I think in some places that is deserved. But we know, because our surveys process millions of responses to satisfaction surveys, that customers are actually very keen to give feedback. Actually, they're keen to give feedback because they long for better service. And it's a hassle to change suppliers. It's a hassle and a risk to switch suppliers, isn't it? If we possibly can, we'd rather stay with the company that we know and get any niggles or wrinkles sorted out. So, of course, people want to give feedback. They want it to be easy. And the risk of changing, there's no guarantee another supplier would be better. So feedback can be a brilliant way for customers to have their voice heard and ideally stay with you, which hopefully is good news for both parties. But as it stands today, I would say probably most companies have feedback programs that I would say are either poor or could be improved significantly. They clearly don't always work for customers. And so actually it's probable that they're not actually working that well for the companies themselves. So first error that we're going to, or first costly mistake that we're going to cover, not having a systematic feedback process at all. And in companies that I've come across, a customer feedback program, it's often seen as an optional extra. It's a nice to have rather than a must have, or it's best practice, something that you might get around to doing one day when you've done all the other projects that seem more important. And even if they do it, it always seems to be the first casualty if there's a crisis or when there's a panic to hit the sales numbers. Well, if we're realistic about it, not having an effective feedback process probably isn't going to kill your business. not overnight anyway. But if you do it right, it does make it easier to win customers, and it does make it easier to keep customers. And it does reduce the number of panics and the number of crises that are stopping some of those companies doing feedback at all. You could say that it helps you move from firefighting to fire prevention. So again, if you do it right, it does profit the business because it makes customers happier. And also it usually makes your people happier too, because nobody likes the chaos. They prefer the calm one where everybody's hitting their targets and the company's being successful. So on the positive side, we work with hundreds of customers who have learned to do it well, and they regard feedback not as an optional extra, but as absolutely essential to doing as well as a business. And I'll give you an example from my own experience. I used to run customer service department for a FTSE 100 company, and I was responsible for hitting our revenue target for services, and that included support contracts and professional services, the revenue from both of those things. I was also responsible for our customer service telephone teams, our customer experience strategy as a company, and for handling complaints. My desk I was like the weapon of last resort if anything really got escalated nastily. Now, I moved into that role at a time when our services revenue in the company was going down. And I took over from somebody who'd just been fired. And I'm pretty sure those two things were connected. Remarkably, though, my predecessor had at one stage collected some customer feedback. There was a satisfaction survey and it had 20,000 responses. Unfortunately, it had been done some months previously, and things had been going so badly already at that time that nobody had had time to read any of it, or nobody had made time to read the responses, let alone do anything about them. Well, I made a point of reading the survey responses as one of the first things I did. And I can tell you, it was actually heartbreaking to read through them. Since doing the survey, we calculated that we'd lost 10% of the customers who'd responded. And of that 10%, I worked out that 66% of the 10%, there were losses that could have been avoided. If only someone had read the feedback when it came in and done something about it. It was full of cries for help. The other 4% of the 10%, well, they were unavoidable losses. Companies gone out of business, they've been acquired, or things like that. You lose customers for unavoidable reason, but the 6% that were avoidable were the ones that was really devastatingly bad. And those people had voted with their feet because their cries for help had been ignored. Now, personally, I had a target on my head. I had to grow revenue by 10% on the previous year. And so my job I suddenly found it just got harder than it needed to be, because first I had to replace the customers which had caused £1 million loss before I even started to show any growth on the prior year. Well, I got together with my managers. What are we going to do about this? And we tried all the usual things to improve service. So we started customer service training, we were doing coaching, we had morale boosting sessions. Morale was in a pretty poor state. So we got people together, we got everybody G'd up about improving things. We did call quality audits, but actually none of those things made any difference to revenue. They weren't bad things to do, but they didn't reverse the decline in revenue. So I thought about all those cries for help, and then we started trying a different approach to customer feedback. We realized that a once a year survey gives an unmanageable amount of data. And not only that, but all that big chunk of data that lands is pretty much immediately out of date. So we started asking for feedback at the times when customers were most likely to have feedback that they wanted to give, not when we decided we wanted to collect it. And that's usually after the customers had some form of interaction with you. And instead of one big lump of data coming in all at once, what that meant was that the volume was spread evenly throughout the year. So we could deal with every response, and we could deal with them quickly. And we could also do it without increasing headcount and without reducing the quality of the service that we were, the day job wasn't impaired alongside that. But the real turning point was not just reading the feedback. The real turning point was when we started to take each one seriously and respond to feedback. We actually found there are only two types of feedback. It made things a bit easier. You either get suggestions on how you can improve and make things better. So, it's a suggestion for how you improve your policies, systems, process, people's behaviors. And the only response that you need to give the customer when they've made a suggestion like that is a polite thank you. That's a great idea, we're going to take that on board, or that's a great idea, but I'm sorry, here's why we're not going to. They feel that they've been given a fair hearing and they don't feel they've been ignored. That's it's all any reasonable person wants if they make a suggestion for improvement. But the second type of feedback was problems. The processes were all fine. It wasn't people complaining about those, but something had gone wrong for them on that day, like an invoicing problem or a request they'd made that hadn't been actioned. And just by simply responding to them quickly and fixing their issue, customers were blown away. Well, we're not used to that happening, are we? When we fill in a feedback survey and we mention a problem, if the phone rings 5 minutes later and somebody's keen to sort it out, that just doesn't happen. But I can tell you can do it, and it does work. It did actually turn the revenue around. We found it was the quickest and cheapest way, not only to ratchet up customer satisfaction, but to ratchet up and to reverse that decline in revenue. And it all boiled down to one thing. It was doing feedback not in a way that collected data that we wanted, but doing feedback in a way that's designed to benefit customers. Well, this is all dead simple stuff. It's all about making customers happy one at a time. So I hope we can agree that unread feedback, or even feedback that's read but not actioned, is the same costly error as not collecting feedback at all. And this slide really sums up why it's essential to have a clear strategy for how feedback can benefit your business. As I just mentioned, unactioned feedback is as bad as not collecting it at all. So if you're just doing it to get some data, or if you're just doing it to get an NPS score to put in your board report or your monthly satisfaction score, then you'll be making the same mistake. You still don't have a functioning feedback program that benefits the business by benefiting customers. And here's the thing, your feedback process will only benefit your business if it's designed with the objective of delivering a benefit to each person who responds to your survey. So better option on the right is better thinking. If you design your feedback process not to give you a higher score or to get a score, but if you design your feedback process to measure satisfaction, and by doing so respond to any areas where there are issues and fix them, those are the things that increase customer retention. They increase the amount that customers are prepared to spend with you, the likelihood that they'll spend with you, and they increase the amount that they're going to give you, prepared to put their personal reputation on the line and recommend you to other people. So the kind of woolly data collection feedback is best practice. We should do it, shouldn't we? Well, maybe one day we'll get around to it. Well, that feedback optional is results in lost customers because you're missing those cries for help. You're not getting the feedback and responding to it properly. Contrast that with the companies who find that feedback is essential to helping them retain customers and improve their reputation and making it easier to acquire new customers. And that actually has a much more positive impact on the business. So first mistake, not collecting feedback at all. Second mistake is setting the wrong targets for feedback. We get what we target, right, don't we? We know we set targets because we want to achieve things and focus people's attentions off them. Well, I hope we can also agree that targets work best when they're directly aligned with your most important objective. So if you take an example of a sport, maybe football or some other team game, it's a good thing for your football team to be very fit and to have good ball control skills and to eat healthily and to have a good team spirit and get the psychology right. And you could set targets for those things. They're all really good things to do, but those would be the wrong targets to set. They're good things to measure, good things to improve, but the wrong targets. Because what's the best? Well, scoring goals is what will make the team successful. So maximizing goals should be what you set as the team's target. Of course, it'd be good to measure fitness and all those other things, because they'll help you to find and identify and pinpoint where the problem areas are, the things that are stopping you from scoring goals. But I see this as actually a very common mistake in all walks of life. Just because you can measure something doesn't mean you should set a target for it. And I hope that somebody from the government is listening in on this as well. You drive the wrong behaviors, basically. And exactly the same way, response rates and satisfaction scores, they're really good things to measure, but they're terrible things to set targets for. If you set a target for response rates, you're probably getting up, sending more reminders so that you get a higher response rate. Well, that will get your response rates a bit higher. It will do. We've tried it. It does get your response rate higher. But customers get upset with you pestering them more and more and filling up their email inboxes. And when you think it through, what's really happening there is that your great quest to improve customer experience in one area ends up with you making customer experience worse in another area when you spam their inboxes with reminders. It's a much better way to improve response rates. And if you set a target for satisfaction scores, well, I'd say even worse things happen. Your staff will put pressure on customers. I've experienced it when somebody in a store gives me my receipt. You don't get change anymore, do you? And they say a 9 or a 10 really does matter. And they look at you, they fix your gaze. Now that's somebody their company is targeted on the satisfaction score, and they're trying to nudge the number up. Or I had a bed delivered and they said, do you know, unless you give us 5 stars, we won't get a Christmas bonus. Well, that's emotional blackmail, isn't it? You know, my kids I won't be able to afford presents for the kids if you don't give us a higher number. Well, I've experienced these and other similar distortions many times. Perhaps you have too. And I always know that it's because the company has set a target for satisfaction. You'll even be tempted to try crazy things like, we had a question recently, can you reverse the scale and put the positive answers on the left so they're much customers not, or color coding the scales, or choosing different words or numbers on the scales to try and nudge the number higher. Well, they will increase the number. Your score will go up. It doesn't mean your customer's any happier. It just means, well, really effectively, you're just playing mind games to get the number up higher. And more importantly, of course, by cheating, to call it what it is, if you forgive me, by cheating, you're actually destroying what should be really useful measures. You're polluting those measures because they could help you find and fix problems. A low score isn't a bad thing. A low score helps you identify somebody who might be at risk. They're actually the things that make you the most money. If you save a customer who would otherwise leave, that's more money on the bottom line. That's a customer saved. So don't destroy the things that help you do that. Keep them as measures. Don't set them as target. Really, a high score only makes you more money in the business if you've earned that higher score, not if you've manipulated it. Now, satisfaction scores are not objectively measurable. The speed of resolving a complaint is something that's objectively measured. You can measure it directly. How many days, how many hours was it? Satisfaction is something that's subjective. It's a sentiment that different customers will quantify differently. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't matter, or it doesn't make your satisfaction score less useful because it's not calculated to 2 decimal places. It just means it's a mistake to lay too much store on the number itself. The number is just a means to an end. As I said a minute ago, it's the means to finding out where the problems lie. So the person, the score is intended to tell you whether the customer thinks you're lousy at one end of the scale, or so somewhere around the middle of the scale, or fantastic at the top of the scale. Those secondary measures are proxies for the things that are really important to customers. So when you ask somebody their satisfaction, what you're asking them to do is to sum up all their experiences with your company and sum it up in one score. But it's the other things that they're summarizing. Is it speed of delivery, or how well do you communicate, or how quickly you can find and fix problems? Those are the things that influence the satisfaction. Those are the things you need to be doing better. And culture is critical to achieving this. It's not something that you can, this is not something ultimately, as I hope you've already picked up, it's not something ultimately about numbers. The bottom picture is what customer satisfaction looks like in companies where you set targets for satisfaction scores, and the top picture is the face of someone who thinks you're brilliant and they're going to tell all their mates. So shaping the culture is really important so that everyone understands that you get a higher score by winning those smiles. So some examples of bad targets to set and better targets. Actually, you don't need to create, if you customer feedback program, you don't need to create new targets. Your target is the same target as you got for your business. Is it growing your revenue, acquiring more customers, improving margin, improving recurring revenue by improving retention? Whatever that job number one is, that should be your target for your satisfaction scores, not to get a higher NPS or whatever. In a not-for-profit, of course, the financials may not be the main, but improving quality of service for all your stakeholders might be the thing in a not-for-profit, but the same principles apply. Thirdly, then, well, as with all comedy, really, good timing is the key. Traditionally, these are the sorts of times when companies would send satisfaction surveys, but as you can see, these timings are based on when people in the company want to get feedback or get some data, rather than when customers are most likely to want to give feedback. So I hope you can see that collecting feedback at these better times when customers want to give it, usually when you've done something for them, is going to give you a much higher response rate because you're asking at appropriate time, and it's going to give you better quality data because those are the times when you've just done something for them. Those are the times when they're going to have feedback that that is relevant and that they want to give you, rather than scratching their head and thinking, oh well, I last heard from you, last dealt with you 6 months ago, and you've now sent me a satisfaction. So what is it? You get much better quality data. It'll all just work much better. But consider for a moment why the old timings are so bad. It's not just response rates and data quality that suffers. When you do the annual survey, you get a score, but it's a picture at a point in time, and it's an averaged across all customers, and by the next week that information's out of date. Everybody's moved on. They may have dealt with you since. Satisfaction may have gone down, and the volume of data, as I said earlier, if it all comes in at once, you can't it's not manageable. You can't deal with it promptly. You can't use those opportunities to pick off areas where customers have got issues and improve satisfactions. So the answer really is to build feedback into your day-to-day business as usual processes. Then it's much easier for customers to tell you what you need to do to keep them, and it spreads the workload much more thinly over time, so that you can impress customers with the speed of your response to them, and it's manageable for you without extra cost and effort. Who doesn't want to stay with a company that's either gets it right first time or fixes it quickly, and it's easy to fix when something goes wrong? So when should we ask for feedback? What are the best times? Not never, not annually, except in some cases in a relationship, and any time that's not relevant to the customers. And these are the best times to ask usually when the customer's just had something dealing with you, usually when you've given them cause to have feedback, which might be praise, and it's good to channel that through to the right people, or it might be an issue that you need to jump on and fix, just to make that customer move from being satisfied themselves to being likely to actually go out and recommend you because you've been that good, or it could be to save the customer. It's all positive things that will improve not only the customer's experience, but improve your bottom line as well. So think about your business, think about the customer journey, measure and improve customer satisfaction at those key touch points. Okay, fourth mistake, getting all this to work smoothly within your company so that you get best benefits without a whole load of extra work, is why most people actually find they soon outgrow general purpose survey software, tools like SurveyMonkey and things like that. So they may be good for a quick proof of concept, but once you've experienced the value of feedback problem, you find that you need additional features in your software, things like integration features to help you do the follow-up, features to do data segmentation so you get the right feedback to the right people at the right time. Those general purpose survey tools don't do that. Sorry, fourth, getting the survey design wrong. Well, a poor survey design can certainly reduce your response rates at the very least. Supposing I've just had a bad experience and I get your survey, and suppose you ask me a load of questions like, where did you hear about us? And that's to help with your marketing. Or what 3 words would you use to describe it? Well, I'm not quite sure why people ask that, but it certainly has no place in a customer satisfaction survey. What I really want you to ask me about is how well you're doing on the things that are most important to me. And I learned this lesson 14 years ago, not with an online survey, but with a small piece of card that I was handed when I left a hi-fi chain store. It had 5 questions on it. Were you served quickly? Was the person who served you friendly, helpful, and knowledgeable? And did we have what you wanted in stock? How happy were you overall with your visit to our shop today? And is there anything else we could have done better? And at the bottom it said, all these cards are returned to our head office and are read personally by our managing director. Well, as it happens, I was very happy with my visit. They'd done a great job. I had a shiny new DVD recorder. It was in stock and it was the cheapest price I could find. So I'd already had the best service and the lowest price, and I was pretty happy. But what then impressed me even more was those questions. In those questions, they showed that they'd understood exactly the things that I wanted them to be good at. It was concise, so it was quick for me to fill in. And not only did I have confidence that somebody would read it, so I wouldn't be wasting my time filling it in, but the managing director himself would be reading it. So I felt valued and confident that I'd be looked after if there was a problem. The card was actually the breakthrough. Getting that card on that day was actually the breakthrough that helped me reverse our decline in revenue in the job that I described earlier. And when we started building our software product at CustomerSure in 2010, I promised myself that I'd take the money from our first paying customer and buy a bottle of champagne and take it to that managing director of the hi-fi chain store. And I did that, and he sent me a lovely letter back. So survey design principles, make it fast, make it less than 30 seconds. You can tell somebody what you like or don't like about their company in less than 30 seconds, and preferably 20. Make it simple, use simple scales. 0 to 10 is usually ideal. Don't overthink the scales unless you're doing market research. It really doesn't matter. Make it fit on one page. Avoid the kind of death by next page. Oh, that's an interesting answer. Here's a few more questions, and your survey gets longer. So avoid what I call death by next. And build confidence that the survey won't be ignored. Why would I spend time giving you feedback? I certainly won't do it again if I send in a feedback form and I get the impression I've just wasted my time because nobody's read it or it's not going to make any impact on my personal experience. Sorry, I'm running a bit behind, so I'm just going to rattle quickly through this last point. And actually, I'm sorry we've run over because this is probably the bought one of the lot, but you'll get the video. You can skip to it in the when we send the the video around. So why is failure to follow up the biggest problem? Well, when the customer submits your survey, you might think it's job done because you've got more data, your survey's bringing in responses, you've got some scores, you've got some feedback and some comments. But what does your customer have when they've hit submit on that survey? Well, why would they fill in another one if you don't? Let's understand how follow-up delivers growth, because wherever they are on the scale, whatever satisfaction score they give you, that represents their starting point. You've got an opportunity you can make things better if you follow up and improve. You can ignore it, as the many examples I've given earlier, and that has a financial impact on your business, as you can see here. Worst case, they may deter others by spreading bad reviews and bad sentiment about it. They go away with a bad taste in the mouth. Best case, they'll go from being pretty happy, but not recommending you, to referring you to others. That brings in new customers who will also pay you more money. So you want to get that satisfaction upwards, but you don't get it higher by measuring it. As the Yorkshire farmer said, you don't fatten a pig by measuring it more often. The follow-up is what moves the needle and makes satisfaction higher and delivers those financial benefits. And actually, you have to do that customer by customer. Some people say to me, well, I can't possibly respond to every piece of customer feedback. I'm sympathetic to that, but I've done it in a FTSE 100 company. I'd be delighted to help if you needed some help or advice on that one. So I'm going to draw to a close there. We've run over time. I'm very sorry about that. A closing suggestion: design those follow-up probes, because it's so important. Because the follow-up is the thing that makes the difference between measuring satisfaction and actually improving it and yielding those financial benefits for the business. Design your follow-up processes before you start sending surveys out. How are you going to catch those suggestions for service improvement and make sure they're politely declined if you're not going to do them, or properly actioned so the customers notice the difference and hear that you've done it if you do? How are you going to catch and respond those cries for help quickly and respond to them and blow your customers' socks off with a speedy response that makes them not only want to stay, but want to recommend you to all their mates? Don't invent new things. You'll already have ways of doing these things. If you get a screaming phone call or a nasty email, you have ways of doing these things. It's not too, what I'm trying to say is there's not too much work in this. It's more thinking it through. And obviously you're going to want to review and improve over time. Software can help you do that. Our software can help you do it brilliantly, but whoever's software you end up using, I hope you found this useful. If you want to do follow-up, please feel free to contact me. We'll send you an email with all these things and with some, probably a couple more resources that'll be useful to you, a video of the webinar. But in the meantime, sorry for overrunning, but thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope that's been useful for you.